Welcome to Indian Creek Bow Hunting Journal. On today's episode, we're going to give you a bird's eye view of what it's like to manage a place for 16 years. I bought this property 16 years ago and have slowly been making it into a deer haven. It's been a lot of work, a lot of fun. So what has 16 years of wildlife management taught me? Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this episode. Nothing new under the sun. One life to live, seeking fun. But shallow is the self-lived life. For me, myself, oh, so much strife. But Jesus is the answer for a life perplexed and wanting more. It's never easy self to deny, but it's the only way to a life on high. All right, let's jump right into it. What I've learned in the 16 years of land and wildlife management on my property in Edwards County, Texas is where I'm at. I'm in the hill country of Texas. We are a semi-arid area. It's I believe the yearly rainfall is around 26.5 inches of rain per year. So it's a pretty dry place. There is some humidity during the year, especially during the spring season and when the rains come as well. But there are also some drier seasons in the year. But 26.5 inches of rain a year is not a whole lot. A lot of people ask me, why do I hunt over a feed barrel? And I even have commenters on the channel that will often say, you're an unethical hunter, or you're this or that or whatever, and you would be arrested in our state if you hunted that way. Well, I'm sorry, but we can't grow food plots on this land. The land that I have is in sheep country, and it's really, really rocky. It is rocky, rocky soil. I have very little topsoil. In the middle part of my property, I have some topsoil, but not a whole lot. So there's not a whole lot that will grow, and even if I did throw seed out there, I would have to drill a well, spend literally tens of thousands of dollars drilling a well. The water is about anywhere from 400 to 500 feet deep, and that's not cheap to drill through rock that distance. And then to pull that water up and pay all the electricity bill, and then try to come up with an irrigation system to water that food plot. It ain't going to happen. It's not worth the thousands of dollars. So our food plot is actually in a 55-gallon drum, and then we supplemental feed protein pellets is what we do, which helps towards our wildlife ag valuation is what you call it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The main goal for my wildlife management is to maximize the habitat for all animals. Really is what I want to create an environment, and you know, with a focus on the deer, of course, emphasis on game animals, mainly turkey and deer, is what I want to do to enhance the property. And so in doing that, there's a few things that I do, and I will talk about that as we go along. But there's three main things that I do to accomplish that goal. I focus on food, water, and cover. Those three things you need. Now, I have not figured out the cover situation for turkey. The turkey on my property are transitory. There's a gentleman that is adjacent to me that has 200 acres, and I noticed that during turkey season I can hear those turkeys, and I'm sure they're roosting in larger trees that he has down on his property. And then they roost on the other side of my property as well, which is, you know, maybe a quarter mile away. So any turkey that I get is going to be transitory. I still haven't figured that turkey component out, but still working on that. But I have figured out the deer component, and here's how that works. And I'm going to go through this as I work through it. First of all, I wanted to talk about the three issues. The first one is water. At present, I started out with one water trough on the place that provided water for the wildlife. In fact, most of this area that you see on the camera, my property is right here, and you can see where the arrow is. I have 100 acres right in this section here, and you can see it's pretty hilly. My area is pretty flat. It does taper down all the way to the road. This section down in here, excuse me, this is not my property. Over here is my property. Got that wrong. Yeah, that's pretty hilly over there. But my property basically goes from this corner right over here on the road, and then it goes up this way, and then cuts over from about right in here over to this section here, and then the road is the bottom part to my property. This whole section here is fairly flat, and then you have a creek bottom that cuts this. This area over here is pretty flat, and then this area kind of tapers down pretty quick. In this area here, I do have a drainage here and a drainage there that's pretty steep. But this main part right in here is pretty flat in this area, and there's a hill here and then a hill over here, which is the highest point on the property where my water tank is. So this is the 100 acres that I'm dealing with. First of all, dealing with water, it's important that you have water. This whole land, as you see this whole section here, you're probably looking at about 500, 600, maybe probably 700 to 800, maybe 1,000 acres in this section here, this whole section that you're looking at. And this whole area would not support a deer unless the landowners were providing water. Water is essential. And so on my place I have 2 water troughs, and those water troughs are right here in the center of my property, in this section right here. And then I have another water trough just below the cabin, which is going to be right about in here, in this section right there. So those are the 2 main water troughs I have. I want to go out to the property and just show you what I do to make sure that it is safe for wildlife and birds and things. So let's go out to the property and deal with that. All right, guys, in order to get Wildlife Ag Valuation credit for water, you have to cover it, or you have to eliminate pigs from getting in there, and that's why the fence is around this water. And if you'll notice in this water as well, this water has rocks in it, and the reason for the rocks is so that when animals get up here and get a drink, sometimes small animals will fall in there. Rats, mice, birds as well can drown in this water, and it'll make the water go bad. Plus you don't want all the birds drowning in there. So mainly for quail. I used to have quail in this place about 10 years ago, but they have since disappeared. Don't know why, but I was originally putting them in there so the quail wouldn't die when they get up in there. But you can see how the rocks are in there to keep the animals from dying, so they can get in there and take a bath or whatever they want to do without drowning. So that's wildlife water for you. All right, so water is an important issue. The second issue is the issue of food. Now, food involves a lot of things. Of course, there is supplemental feed, and I do that with 20% protein. It's another way that I get my wildlife tax evaluation. But providing supplemental food is important because the carrying capacity for deer is on this particular property, and we do, out of the whole 11,000 acres, I'm a part of an association, Indian Creek Ranch Association, and I have 100 acres out of almost 11,000. It's like 10,650 or something like that. And the whole association actually does a census every year, and we could turn that in. We don't actually, with our plan, we don't turn it in because we don't need it. But I could turn that in and get credit for the wildlife evaluation as well, the 1D1. But in doing that, the carrying capacity for this land is somewhere around one deer every 20 acres. Now, every year in the association-wide survey, it shows that we have a deer population often that is about 1 deer per 5 acres, which is too much if there was ever a big drought that took place. But there is so many landowners at 100-acre pieces, 100, 200, and 300-acre pieces. Most of them are 100 acres. And most landowners supplemental feed, so we can carry a larger amount of deer. And especially with the exotics, there's a lot of axis deer. Recently there's been a few fallow deer that have been showing up, and then pretty much that's pretty much it. There's a few others that straggle in. We do have free-ranging elk as well. There's probably a herd of about 80 to 100 elk that free range throughout the 10,000 acres, and I know go outside the property as well. So and oftentimes I will catch those elk on camera. I've also filmed them before. Could have shot some of those elk before, but landowners generally at Indian Creek, we've decided not to shoot anything that's 5x5, or we could shoot anything that's 5x5 or bigger. Some landowners agree to that. There's always disagreement, and then there's always landowners that just shoot anything they want, which is kind of makes it hard on all of us, because those of us at least that would like to shoot bigger deer. But anyways, so with the food situation, there's a supplemental feeding, but then also I do a lot on my property to enhance the natural browse for the deer that are out there, and my focus is going to be on whitetail. So the axis and the elk are extras or freebies on there. And to do this, I have to go back in the history of my property, and so I want to do this on Google Earth Pro because I can go back. This image right here was taken. A satellite image was taken of my property, and here's the west corner, here's the north corner, and then here is the east corner. So you can draw straight lines between these dots, and you will have my property line on the north side to the west side, northwest side, and the northeast side. And then the road is my property boundary on the south side. So you can see it there. Now this was taken probably about 4 or 5 months after I took ownership of the property. And you can see how thick the cedar is in here. When I first purchased this property, I did not have a whole lot of animals on this property. And in fact, it was rare that I ever saw an axis deer on camera. And the reason I believe for that was because my property was so infested with cedar. And you can see the cedar thickets here. All this area in here that I'm highlighting with my cursor here, all this area over in here, most of this you could not even walk through without getting cut up by the cedar. This area down in here was the same. It was all this area down in here was hard to go through without getting cut up by cedar. Now you could walk, these areas are pretty open, but there was enough cedar in here that you couldn't really shoot from the pad that I had created. This is before I built my cabin. But when this pad was created, right after I bought the property, it would have been hard to shoot anything down in here. I could sit up on top of this hill up in here and look down in this opening right down into here, but that's about it. And then it's hard to see past these trees that were in front of the pad. So it was pretty thick. And then as you move into the years, you can see as the cutting began. This was in probably 3 years after I bought the property. And this area down in here, you can kind of see that it's free of cedar. There was an old fire here that happened probably 5 to 10 years before I bought this property, because when I bought it, this area was pretty open. And then as these oak moths begin to grow in, those oak moths are pretty thick down in here. But there's not a whole lot of cedar in there because we've kept the cedar cut out of there over the years. And then as you move up in years, you can see that over the years I've cut some of these areas out. This one still shows a lot of thick, but you can see it thinning out in here because we cut a lot out in here in this area. We also thinned this area out a little bit. Mainly what we were focusing on when we first started cutting was taking the cedar out of the oak moths so that we could save those oak moths. And then those oak moths begin to produce more acorns. and also browse was able to grow up under those oak mott's. And so then we began to see by 2012, this image is taken in 2012, we began to see more and more axis deer as a result, because we were opening up those areas and beginning to clear out some of the cedar and growing more grass and more forbs that could grow up. Because when there's just thick cedar, nothing grows underneath it. And cedar is of very little value. Unless deer are stressed, they're not going to really browse much on cedar. They might a little bit, but when they get stressed, that's the only time they really browse it hard, when there's no other food on the range. Then as you move from 2012 to 2000, and the next image that I have here is 2014. But I had cut this area right in here. I had actually thinned some of this out, so you can see this beginning to thin out, and you can see a lot of the oak mott's in here where I took the cedar out, and that created a lot of browse and also a good bedding area for the deer right in this area. So I'll keep this area pretty thick with cedar, but not in the oak mott's. I'll keep it cleared out so there's food in, good food and cover. And then as you go into the latest image, which is 2018, that's 3 years ago, you can see that I clear cut this cedar on this far side over here. And this has created a lot of browse in here. So let's take a look at some of these areas on the property, and you can get a picture for what I'm talking about. All right, guys, this is a section that when I first bought this property, this whole hillside back here, of course the cabin wasn't there and neither was the pad, but this whole hillside was just infested with cedar. Cut a lot of the cedar out from up in this section here, and down in here there was just a little open section down in this area over here, and when you went out further it was completely infested with cedar, or I would say you could still walk through it, but it was still pretty thick. And so I've cut a lot of this cedar out of here and made it quite a bit more open so I can sit on the porch and enjoy my cabin right there. I'm up on the high side of my property here, and as you can see, really the video does not do it justice because it's just a beautiful sight out here, but you can tell from down over here, this section here is an open spot that it was a little bit open, about half the size there, and then I've cleared a lot of the cedar out of that. Back behind these trees here is a tip top of the hill that you can't really see, probably because of the sun there. Back behind here is a water tank where I have all the water for the property that comes off of the association well, which is about 1/4 mile that way. And the association provides water here, wildlife water, and so that's what keeps the wildlife going on the place. This section over here is the second highest point hill on the place, and you can't see beyond that, but I'll take you over on that hill and I'll show you all the section over there that I clear cut. This right here is an example of an oak mott where I cut the cedar out of it, and you can see it's growing up nicely now. These oak trees are nice and thick now, whereas before they were all gaunt and skinny. But you'll notice that we cut the cedar out of this probably 4, maybe 5 years ago. And you'll notice, look, already I got cedar growing back up in it. You can see all that little cedar growing up. And so within the next 4 or 5 years, when we're slated to cut this 10 acres right here, then we will we'll come back and cut that cedar out of there. You also notice I left some of these cedar. This used to be a cedar bush right here, real bushy. I cut all the bottom off of here, and the reason for that is I like to use this stuff for building material. So I'll let this grow up tall. I'll keep it chopped all down low to let it grow tall and fatter, so I can use it for beams to make hunting blinds out of, or I built my porch out of that stuff. I also used some of it inside my cabin when I built it in 2010, so I want to keep some of that around to use as building material. This is an example of an oak tree that I freed up from all this cedar that was growing in around it. And this was last year, I believe we cut this, maybe 1.5 years ago, I can't remember exactly, but it's been pretty recent. So we pile this cedar, and that will create habitat for like squirrels and mice and rats and things like that. I've actually seen a whole lot more raptors on this property too since I've been piling this cedar. A lot more foxes as well. We got to control the number of foxes though. They'll keep your turkey numbers down. All right, here's another oak moth that we've cut out, and it's looking a lot more healthy now after about 1.5 years, same area. But we're on the second highest point on my property, just off the top of the hill over here, and you can overlook the west side of my property. That's the north side over here and the west point over there. And you can see that kind of that open area that I clear cut. It's the only area where I really clear cut. There are other areas, but not that large that I clear cut. You can see the middle's kind of thick, and I left it thick for a reason, because I wanted the deer to have a haven right there in the middle to be able to get away from pressure or anything like that, or to hide or to actually bed in there. One of the things you'll notice as you're beginning to work on your land, that things will pop up as you begin to clear out areas, especially of the cedar. This is an area where I cleared out a lot of cedar, and way in the past, I mean early on, that cedar was cleared out of here. But you'll notice these prickly pear have taken off once this opened up, and so I'm going to have to write or adjust my plan to begin to deal with some of these prickly pear. You can see some over there as well on this side, but I haven't yet figured out how I'm going to do this without getting stickers all over me. Maybe I'll take my ATV and try to make a shovel out of the front and just kind of knock them over and pile them up and burn them or something, but I'll figure it out. It's going to have to adjust the plan a little bit. This kind of oak slash hackberry mott right here looks like a mess to us, but this is actually the dining room for the deer. Because right here, a deer will, whitetail deer that is, will, and also the axis, as well as other deer, they'll sift through here and they will just slowly pick apart whatever they want to eat at the particular time that tickles their fancy. And they'll come along and they might nibble on these branches here. You can kind of see right here where they've been nibbling on it, right there, actually. See that? Right there. And they'll just come through here and they'll nibble on these bushes. I believe that's a hackberry, but don't hold me to it because I don't know my bush names. But they'll come through and nibble on all of this. And this cedar right here has been cut out of here once already, maybe even twice. I can't remember, probably a couple of times. But we'll come back again in about 6 or 7 years and cut this out again so that this other stuff will grow. Because if this cedar was overgrown up here, it would cut out all of this other food for the deer. And this cedar is the least valuable for deer. They'll really only browse it. They'll browse it a little bit, even when there's other food in the range, just a tiny bit. But if they get stressed and there's not any food on the range, they'll hit that cedar hard, and it's not that nutritious for them. So that's why we're cutting most of it out of here. All right, we're on the main area where the largest open section of the property was when I bought it. It is much more open now, very much more open, because there was just this middle section here, and all these trees and stuff around us were just infested with cedar. You can see some of the cutting we've been doing over here. And then back over here, these center aisles were just infested with big cedar, and these trees weren't very healthy at all. But we've cut a lot of that out of there. So this is that section that's the most open, right almost in the center of my property. You can kind of see the blind over there that's for the middle blind. Now you can see how prolific this cedar is. Look at this. I cut this out just about 2 years ago, actually. And you can see how fast this stuff grows back up in here. So that's why you got to keep coming back and cutting it, or else it'll just, within a matter of 10, 15, 20 years, depending on how much rain you get, this cedar will come in and just cover this back over again and kill these oak moths back out again. So you got to, it's a constant job to keep this stuff clear. Here's a good example of a spot that I actually clear cut. This whole area right here, from this section over here, that was a little bit open going that way. You can see down that corridor there. But all this in here was completely, there goes a doe right there. But all this area in here was completely infested with cedar, and literally you could not walk through it. You literally could not walk through it. When I cut all this out and then eventually burned it,
And now I will see deer coming through this area. I can see this from the stand back over here. But deer will work through this real slow, and they'll be eating, nibbling on stuff now. Where this area, this whole maybe 1.5 acres, 2 acres in this area here would have been completely useless. Now it can be used by the deer for food, because we got rid of a lot of that cedar. This is exactly what this cedar looked like, because I haven't cut this side over here out, because this is that thick area I was telling, the edge of that thick area I was telling you that it was going to be the bedding area. And so this stuff I haven't even cut, and this is what it would have been like trying to walk through it. This right here, just impossible. Now this has been thinned out beyond this a little bit, but here you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like to try to get through that cedar that wasn't cut. So this is the area where that burn happened, probably about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. That was before I owned the property, but you can see we cut this about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, and this is slated to be cut again next year, I believe it is. Might be the year after that, but you can see these cedars are already growing up in them pretty tall, and we'll come back in and cut all these cedars out. You can see this ancient fire. Actually, this is a tree that was burned. You can kind of see where the tree was burned right there. It burned not only the cedar out of here, but the oaks as well. And you can see some of these places are down a little bit further that you see right there on the screen. These oak moths are growing back in real nice and healthy, but they're actually too thick. I kind of got to go in and thin them out a little bit so we can get some of them growing a little better. But anyways, that's how that fire is a good thing in time. But if it burns all your cover, that's not a good thing. Okay, this is the bedding area I was talking about on the east side of the creek. And you can see all the piles. I have not burned in here yet. There's 2 different cuttings that have happened. One about 7 or 8 years ago, and then I just recently cut that starting this year. And so I'm going to need to come back in here in about 2 or 3 years and burn some of these piles, because there's getting to be too many of them. But you can see, you could not walk through this period. You can see all the stumps that are around. I don't know if you see those, but you could not walk through this at all. But you can see how it's cleared it out nicely, made a nice bedding area, made it so these deer can actually walk back through here and browse, opened up the canopy. All these oak moths were just filled with cedar. And so clearing them out like that has created browse underneath there, so they can actually feed in here and bed in here. And again, saving some of these for construction material, trying to save some of those long, tall cedars for that. So this is the thick bedding area on the east side of the creek, or excuse me, the west side of the creek. You can see how I've thinned some of it out here, and you can actually walk through some of this, but it used to be that you could not walk through this at all. But now with some of this cut out of here, it's kind of given a place again for the deer to bed, and also a place for them to feed, because having opened this up a little bit, you're going to have some food that grows in here. So here we are on the edge of the thick area, and then the clear cut that I did a few years back now, but you can see how clear it is. And this is the creek bottom, and this creek bottom right here, before I burned all this cedar out of here, it used to look like that right down there. This area in here, you could not walk through it. It was so thick. And as this is the only area, like I said, that I'm going to clear cut. But you can see this is a venerable smorgasbord for a deer. Just all of the forbs and all the growth that's growing up from the ground as a result of all the rains that we've been having and all the trees. These trees have been opened up. I mean, it seems like every year now, huge crop of acorns in here, just because there's no cedar choking out the oaks anymore. So we're right here in the center of the clear cut, and you can see how clear it is around here. And right here is the area that I left thick, so that the deer could have a place of safety to come out in the center of this, so that they kind of feel safe if they need to get into some bushes or maybe bed down in here. But you can see how nice this place really looks. You can also see that there's very little of this prickly pear cactus in here. But probably in about 8 to 10 years, I'm gonna have to come in here and try to control that stuff, because when you open it all up, this prickly pear cactus just goes crazy. If you wanna know why we don't grow food plots on this place, you're looking at the reason right here. In fact, if the land is not like this with rocks, it will be like this with about maybe an inch of soil on top of it. So, yeah, we don't grow food plots. Our food plots are in a barrel. I'm sorry if you have a problem with that. That's just the way it is in Texas. In a lot of Texas anyways, in the part of Texas I'm in. This last section is on the southeast side. It's really thick and really steep in here. There's actually two creek bottoms that come together, coming down off from where the cabin is. And it's really thick in here. About all this is good for is probably a bedding area. There's really not a whole lot of food in here. And it's really, really rocky. So I just probably always keep it a bedding area. There's really not much I can do with it because it's just so rough in here and thick. But I probably want to keep it thick just so the deer feel safety and can have a place to bed in here. So
then the last thing we focus on in our wildlife management is cover, of course. And as I mentioned, some of these areas that I have clear cut the cedar, I have pretty much clear cut all the cedar out that I'm going to clear cut. The rest I'm going to leave because I'm a bow hunter. I want some cover. I want the deer to stay there, and the idea is to create a piece of land. It's only 100 acres, but to create a piece of land that if a deer wanted to, they could stay there and have everything they needed. But the reality is on 100 acres, you're not going to get deer to stay on your property unless you build a high fence, and that's just, I mean, high fence. First of all, I don't like high fences, but if you're going to do a high fence, I hope you have at least 2,000 acres, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Then you can kind of create habitat. 10,000 is much better because then you can create habitat. When you got smaller pieces of land, you're constricting the gene pool in your deer population, and you better have some program where you're bringing new genetics into the property, or else you're going to have some ingrown deer. Anyways, to each his own, I guess. I'm not going to complain about other people that want to do with what they want with their property. But that last issue of cover is really important. So I have left, basically all we're going to do with the rest as we continue to control the cedar is keep all of the oak mott's cleaned out of any cedar. Now there's some that still have cedar in it, and we're still in the process of cleaning some of those out, and I've shown you some of those and what they look like, and we'll eventually get all of those cleared out from the cedar, and then that way that will produce more forbs and growth for the deer to eat, as well as acorns. But this section here is always going to be a thick bedding area. This section over here is always going to be a thick bedding area, and then this area in here will probably be a little bit less bedding. They do bed down in this little section over here, which is kind of like a little valley that pours off into this dry creek bottom. And then I know they do travel down in this area as well, and I want to keep this area thick because this is like a travel corridor, helps them feel safe on the property. And then the kill zones that I have in the property with spinning feeders is what's called my middle blind, and that's right here, right up against this thick area, and then my south blind, which is right up against this thicket right here. And then I also have my north blind, which is up against this thicket right here, in this section right here, so I can catch deer in this area as well. Oftentimes I will sit in this this blind right here, and I see these axis deer out in this area here feeding, and they never come to the feeder. Of course, if I was shooting with a rifle, I could shoot them, but a rifle tends to bore me, sorry, but it tends to bore me. So I got to get them close. All right, so that covers cover as well. Now, as far as the 1D1 Ag Tax Appraisal, that's what I do. Now, I believe there's about 4 different ag evaluations that you can have on your property, and the the acreage is going to depend or vary widely. I've heard that in some counties you can have as low as 5 acres and put bees on them, and then that counts as your ag valuation. Now I've got some links below that are really good, so I'd read through those articles that I have a link below, because it's where I was reading some of that. So you'll want to read a lot of those depending on what you're wanting to do with your property. But for my specific purpose, it is wildlife management, and that's the ag valuation that I have. There are 4 basic things that we do every year to make sure that we maintain that wildlife valuation on my taxes. And you want to do that. A wildlife, or actually an ag valuation, is extremely valuable to a landowner, because my 100 acres, if I did not have an ag valuation on mine, my 100 acres, my taxes would be somewhere in the neighborhood in between $4,000 and $4,500. I know that because one of my neighbors who just recently bought told me what he's paying in taxes, and I told him about this valuation, so he's in the process of trying to get it. But it takes you 5 years to get it. Sometimes they'll let you have it faster if you get the paperwork in, but it will generally take you 5 years to get it back off of a property that it's lapsed at. So you don't want to lose it. Right now I pay probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, on the land itself, the pure land on itself, around $200 a year. With my cabin on it, that adds a valuation to it, and you don't get any ag exemptions for that. And so for the structures on the property, I pay about another $400, I believe it is, somewhere in that neighborhood of taxes a year. So my cabin itself, I pay more taxes on that than I do on the land itself. So so the ag 1D1 ag tax appraisal is really, really important. Again, I've got some great blogs down below and some links below that will help you learn some of those issues. There's 4 main issues. I'll close with this. But there's 4 main things that we do every year. Number 1 is we provide wildlife water. That counts. And you have to have 3 of these. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 different activities you can choose from, depending on what you are managing wildlife for. Some people do songbirds, and so there's different things you can do for that. Some people do, I don't know, like raptors or things like that. So there's different things that you do, but since I'm doing deer, the thing that I do is water, providing water for wildlife. The other thing is the cedar abatement or cutting of cedar. I cut 10 acres of cedar per year. Not clear cutting, but it's very clear in our wildlife plan that we are cutting cedar that's about head tall or shorter. Now we sometimes cut more than that because we want to clear out those oak mott's, but most of that cedar now that is full grown and mature, we're leaving, except when it starts encroaching on these oak mott's, because we want them to grow tall and strong. And you can tell the difference when you cut out the cedar. They're all gaunt and skinny, and then when you pull that cedar out, the next year that tree is just coming alive. So that really helps out. So the cutting of cedar, water, cutting of cedar, and then we pile that cedar for a period of about 3 to 4 years. I had a wildlife biologist who was out at our property one time, and he told me, he says, after 3 or 4 years, those piles have past their effective use, and so after about 3 to 4 years, what we do is I usually come back and burn a lot of those piles, because when you clear cut that cedar, it is just, I mean, it's everywhere. It's hard to get to see. You got big piles of cedar. So I come back in days where I can, when it's moist, that I can burn that stuff. So those are 3 activities. And the 4th one is providing wildlife supplemental feed. And we do that year round. And I'll show you right now how we do that with a food barrel, and how you can save a lot of money if you buy a certain way and build some certain feeders by getting 20% protein at $10 per bag. So watch this segment here. There's a deer right over there. I don't know if you can see her. She's just watching me at about 35 yards and going away. See you later. Anyway,
Yeah, she was here feeding. I just knocked her off her dining table. But here's another example of the pig fence we got for this and the water here that we have. And then here's what I want you to see is this feed barrel. This will fit 500 pounds of pellets. And I built it. It's built out of wood. I used the stuff you buy at Home Depot to spray the outside with, it's like the pickup bed spray you put on there, so that helps it last a little bit longer. But you'll notice here that these deer can feed. It's just a free feed. I fill it up with about 10, 11 bags, and it just slowly feeds its way out. And I can take the top off here to fill it up. So pretty simple to make. And then occasionally I will feed alfalfa hay with this.
All right, thank you for watching. And be sure and read through those articles, because there's going to be a lot more information that I could share with you here. Be sure and give us a thumbs up and subscribe and tick the reminder bell, and we will give you a notice of future videos that come out. Appreciate you watching, and we'll see you out at the ranch at the next hunting episode.